off. Okay, all right.
So I have my glasses on, and that means I can read, but I can't see all of you, but I assume you're there somewhere. Welcome to A Smart Community Imperative, a chat with Jonathan Reichental. And this is presented on behalf of the Center for Research and Innovation in Smart Cities. So on behalf of the Center and UW-Parkside, I welcome all of you here to hear the discussion between Jonathan Reichental and William Martin. So let me tell you a little bit about Jonathan Reichental. Why is he here? Well, he's here because we feel that it's really a time for the southeast region of Wisconsin to actually become re-energized around the idea of smart technology, smart communities, and all of the things that actually means, which is inclusivity, efficiency, efficacy, and access, right? So Jonathan is actually a really good person to have here tonight, and we're really pleased that he agreed to visit us today. He has quite a varied, almost a Renaissance-like career, I think, because he's done so many different things and has so many different experiences in different areas. Jonathan has been the CIO of Palo Alto, California, and was instrumental in some of the smart city policies that were developed there. He also is the author, as you probably saw from the books behind us, of two really excellent books, I think. Smart Cities for Dummies, which I still cringe a little bit at that title, but it's actually an excellent book, and I like it because you can read it in chunks and don't have to sort of sit down and read it all the way through, which I really like. Also, a really excellent book on exploring smart cities for children. And I think this is really important, as many of us have seen, that smart cities is something that a lot of us have had a little trouble wrapping our heads around. And some of that is because we're old. But I think we also need to realize that children are coming up, and they're actually going to be living in a world that has smart technology, smart cities, smart policy, and all of the things that come with that. And it's really good to get them used to and appreciative of the idea and what that means. So those two books are in the back. Also, Jonathan is a teacher. And he is teaching, I think, at 3 different universities in California, if I'm not wrong, and has developed a smart policy curriculum for Pepperdine University. Those are just some of the things that Jonathan has done. And I still want to quote, I want to share another quote from Jonathan that I found this afternoon that I really liked, is that, here's his comment on innovation and movement. 14% of innovations are radical, and they produce 61% of profits. Then why are 86% of innovation resources focused on incremental improvements? And that's, I think, something that we really need to think about as we discuss this. And today, helping us learn more from Jonathan and hear his thoughts is William Martin, who is kind enough to actually moderate and ask the questions of Jonathan. William Martin is a force in this area in his own right. He has a long history of working with the state of Wisconsin, but more recently, many of us know him when he was the CIO for the city of Racine, and who, without his work and his efforts, I don't believe he would have gotten the Smart Cities designation. So he was very instrumental in that. He also was instrumental while he was with the city in getting the city and other partners ready to actually provide a test experience for autonomous vehicles, which you've probably seen in the news in the last couple of weeks. But remember, these things just don't pop up. They actually have been a couple years or more than that in the works, and it's William's innovation and drive and forcefulness that actually got that off the ground. More recently, he is the CEO of Wisconsin Diversified Investments and runs what some of you may be familiar with as the Badger Opportunity Fund, which is designed to get folks to invest in the area in areas that might have great promise that has yet been unfulfilled. So I know that we have a really good interviewer and we have a really good interviewee. So I invite you to enjoy the evening. Thank you.
Well, good evening, Parkside. Thank you so much for having both of us here. And I want to just start by asking you, Jonathan, to talk to us a little bit about the definition of a smart city. You know, so many of these conversations are wrapped around these terms. We don't necessarily always have the same definition that we're working with, and you're the expert, so talk to us about your definition.
Thanks, Will. And before I answer, again, I wanted to say how honored I am to be here at the university and to be in Wisconsin. The team here has just put on such an amazing welcome for me. I've had already 2 incredible days, and I got a bit of a half day tomorrow, and then I head back to San Francisco. So I want to thank the university and the community, and all the folks who are joining us also
We have
online.
plenty of room if you want to come and teach here.
Very nice. So you asked me about what is a smart city, and the truth be told, if you ask 10 people, it would be 10 different answers. It isn't something that we have well defined as a sort of a group of thought leaders in this space yet. And my way of answering the question is to say, let's not worry too much about the term. Let's think about the outcomes. What are we trying to achieve? And that will help us think about, how we might think about the term later on. What we all need to recognize is we are an urbanized planet for the first time, a majority urbanized planet. And through the 21st century, we're going to continue to urbanize more and more. So our future belongs to cities as humanity. The human experience will be in a city context. Now, cities have served us quite well. In fact, they are the most complicated thing humans have ever invented, and they are in many ways the most successful in bringing the most amount of people out of extreme poverty. For example, between the years 2008 and 2015, 200 million people were brought out of extreme poverty in India because of urbanization. There's a lot of good things to say about it. We through the course of 3 industrial revolutions and now a 4th industrial revolution, the lives of humans have been, on balance, improved. Our life expectancy has increased. A lot of this we can attribute to many of the positive aspects of urbanization. Now, that's all the good stuff.
Okay.
Right? Let's get to the reality. We are now in the 21st century, and we have some real complicated problems to solve. I like to say that we had a big party in the 20th century, and now we've got a hangover in the 21st century, because we have issues with significant congestion, right? When it comes to things like transport, we have in the United States specifically real issues with not enough homes and homelessness. We still have too many issues with inclusion in our cities, not enough equality, and cities. If you believe the scientific consensus, have been at the heart of humans creating a lot of carbon emissions, which are heating up the earth. And if you've any chance of solving the problem, or at least managing it, I think is the right way to think about it, we're going to do that in an urban environment. That said, how do we respond to all of that? What are the solutions? I'm an optimist. I want to think about how we do, how do we do the great work of moving progressively forward and bringing more people out of poverty and creating more inclusion for more people every day. Well, part of it is going to be by approaching problems differently, by innovating, creating new ideas into value. But technology is going to play a big role. It's at the center of everything, right? The center of every private company now. Every business is a technology company, if you think about it, right? And our cities are kind of moving in that direction too. For the first time, we have a completely new tool set. We have completely new tools about how we manage city data, how we can monitor and manage things like water quality and air quality. We have the emergence of things like self-driving vehicles, things we're going to get into later. But this new toolkit of technologies are some of the things we're going to apply to solve these problems. And when we do that, the hope is we create smarter and more sustainable communities. And that's what it's about. That's what it's about. By the way, I just wanted to say one quick thing, because this often people don't think about the topic this way. You might think when I say technology, I'm talking about digitalization, I'm talking about computers and microchips and stuff. Technology is bicycles as well, right? I like to say that trees are nature's technology, right? Trees have been pretty good to us. And if we build urban forests inside some of our cities, those can be game-changing on multiple levels too. So we need to think broadly about the application of technology.
Oh, all right. This is the way we started the conversation already, right? So in terms of thinking about this, How did you get into the smart city space? What interests you and what keeps you in it?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's a little bit of a surprise in my life, actually. I don't think, I know for sure I wasn't planning to work in a city. But sometimes when you're presented with an opportunity and you're curious and you're open-minded, something I encourage all students to be, everyone thinking about the career ahead of them, or even if you're mid-career, be open-minded to possibilities. Even if you think you're not yet qualified, still be open-minded to it. And so a headhunter called me. I was working for a private company as a technology leader and asked me, would I like to work in a city? And I decided to listen, to say, tell me more. Now it happened to be the city of Palo Alto. This is often called the birthplace of Silicon Valley. It's right between San Jose and San Francisco on the West Coast. And well, I thought that's kind of interesting. That's a little bit different. Here you have a community that is surrounded by Silicon Valley and surrounded by all the technology companies. You have an enthusiastic city manager who wants to think differently. Those conditions sounded good to me. They were like, that's the kind of problem I want to, really immerse myself in. Now, I worked in government for a little over about 7 years. It was a fantastic time. Learned a lot, and like a lot of people who take a new job, and it was a leadership position, I wanted to be able to make a difference. And I went in. I said, we're going to change the game here. We're going to think completely differently about how you deliver government services in a city. And so I thought over my tenure, at first I actually thought I'd be there for 3 years, and that would be it. I ended up staying for 7. Part of it was I wanted to see some things finish. And so I thought by the time I'm done, I will have helped, working with my team and with partners and the leadership team, I will have helped change the city. The surprise, of course, and this is a surprise to me above anyone else, is the city changed me.
Oh, wow.
And so this is the story. I actually learned about the role of cities. I saw that we have these major challenges. Being a problem solver, this seemed like, wow, the most incredible set of problems ever to solve. I could see the role that technology could play, my background. So I really fell in love with this idea that if we think differently and we're bolder, we take risks, we're prepared to get to experiment and ask for support, we can make a difference in people's lives in a real meaningful way. And so because we were having successes at the city, a lot of people wanted to know what we were doing. By the way, they wanted to know what we were doing that was working, but I wasn't afraid to tell people what we were doing that wasn't working, because you got to tell both sides of the story. So I got invitations to speak to other governments around the United States and then outside the United States. And I just saw the big picture, and just developed a passion for it. It kind of was the nexus of everything that I love. And so as the city manager finally announced he was going to retire, after 35 years in public service, I thought that's probably a good time for me to think about my next thing too. And I had some options when I left the city, but I said, you know what? Why don't I do this full time? Pretty much. Why don't I build a business around this? And so that's what I do today. And it's not everything I do, but it's a good chunk of the sort of advisory and education work I do with cities and communities around the world, is to help them move forward with their smarter and more sustainable plans.
Wonderful, wonderful. So if you could talk to us a little bit about, you see so many different initiatives in so many different places. What stands out for you?
There's a long list of projects and work that's been done in cities all over the world. This is not an American project. The smart city movement is a global phenomenon. If you travel to major cities around the world, and even smaller cities, you're going to see there's traffic issues. Right? This is not an American thing. And in many countries, by the way, like in the city of São Paulo in Brazil, it's the worst traffic I've ever experienced.
Wow.
The airport is pretty close to downtown, but it takes a couple of hours to get to it.
Wow.
Just to give you a sense of that, and their public transport isn't fantastic, so you don't have many options. So let me think of a few examples. Well, let's start relatively, local to the United States. One of the things that we've discovered, maybe not by surprise, but we were forced to discover it more urgently, is not everybody's connected to the internet in the US, right? And those that are connected, many of them actually have pretty poor connections. Even in the capital of Silicon Valley, which we call, which is San Jose, we call that, there are people with dial-up, right? There's people without, and then there are people with dial-up. In the city of New York, similarly, this is, one of the great cities of the world, 9 million people or more, and a big chunk of them don't have access to the internet. And we know now how important it is. The pandemic reinforced that. And finally, they want to solve that. So they're going after that. They got the investment, the approval of the mayor, they got the money. And so for me, you might think, well, that's not the most elaborate answer in the world. But that, to me, reflects, first of all, this commitment to connecting everybody, and forming partnerships and creative ways to do it so that everybody can have a minimum broadband connection to the internet. We need that in the 21st century. Maybe the other one, because it's just a bit of top of mind, I've been talking about it a little bit today, is the initiative in the city of Dubai in the United Arab Emirates, where they decided to become the first paperless city. Right, so one of the things we can all, I think, what resonates with us is when you think about government, often you think about bureaucracy and paperwork. We've made really great progress, but there's still too many forms to fill out often, and it's still, the processes are a little bit bumpy. And so in Dubai, they said, well, let's digitize the whole thing so you can pretty much get every service you want, where possible, on a smartphone or a tablet or a laptop or something. And they've really made tremendous inroads to achieve that. By doing that, by the way, they've discovered processes that were inefficient. And now they're reinventing how they do some things. The final example, which I think is more of an emotional kind of example in terms of a smart city, is like many big cities in the world, Helsinki in Finland had a homelessness issue, quite a severe one, and this is a tough problem. This is a really tough problem, and so you've got to be innovative, which is a characteristic of building better, smarter communities. And they said, they made a commitment. They said, we're going to solve this. It's not enough to say it's unsolvable or it's difficult or it's complex and it'll never. They said, we're going to figure out how we solve it. And over the course of the last few years, they've pretty much eliminated homelessness in the great city of Helsinki. They did it in smart ways. So that, to me, falls into that category of a good example. That's a meaningful example of a smart project.
Oh, so it sounds like engagement is a major piece of this and really being relevant to what the communities really need.
Yeah, sure.
So talk to us a little bit about your global perspective. You started to talk about very different kinds of communities.
Yeah.
Could you describe how smart cities is unfolding? Is it more of a regional issue? Are you seeing themes that are really global in their scale? Or are there more localized issues as countries are grappling with these?
Yes, great question. The first thing to restate, this is a global phenomenon, right? Our cities are not ready for some of the challenges, and they're not dealing with current challenges of the 21st century. So I see it whether it's in Southeast Asia or South America, United States, or Europe, or elsewhere. Cities are struggling with a large variety of issues. What's really important for every community is what they are challenged with, right? So what might be important here locally is perhaps very different to what is important in Sydney in Australia, right? Or an equivalent sized city perhaps in Europe. So it is important to always recognize that the solutions to community challenges are very localized, to your question. But there are a few things that are pretty consistent, and I've been asked this question so often about, what do you see around the world, that I kind of distilled it down to 4 areas. There are more, but these are the 4 areas I talk about often. First is a desire to have more digital solutions. People don't want to go to a city office necessarily when they can do it quickly on their smartphone and do self-service without any human intervention. So many government services can be done that way. And that's a multi-trillion-dollar opportunity to convert to that. It's underway, but there's lots of work to do. So that's the first one. The second one is transportation. You know, moving people and goods has become really hard and frustrating. And often it's a case of like, you know, people can't get to where the work is. You know, in the favelas of Brazil, you know, there's some skilled people, but they can't reach the jobs in time to make it meaningful and go home. So they have to figure out different forms of transportation. Sometimes those, what do you call those? You know, the vehicles that are on the wires that.
Oh, the trams.
Yeah, but they go up mountains. You know.
Oh.
Somebody knows the name too. Okay. So you have to get creative with things like that. The third one is energy, and no matter what city you go to, assuming it's growing. By the way, 20% of the cities in the world are shrinking, right? So 80% are growing, but 20% of the cities in the world is still a big number of cities, or they're declining, right? So 80% are growing, some faster than others. And so our appetite for energy is not exactly disappearing, right? It's increasing as more things are plugged in and we need more electricity, we need more power. So each community has to figure out, you know, how do they meet the energy need without killing the planet at the same time. And so there is this transition from, you know, to non-renewable, from carbon-based energy to non-carbon or renewables. That's happening at different rates. Some countries are very far along in that. Germany, the German cities are doing well. There's a city of Freiburg. It's almost entirely powered by solar. And other countries and cities will take different approaches, everything from wind to biomass and thermal and nuclear. And so it's all hands on deck, you know, non-carbon type future there. And the fourth one is sustainability. Okay. And whilst a big part of sustainability is climate change, for sure, or perhaps climate emergency is more appropriate, sustainability goes way beyond that. You know, are we consuming resources at a rate that leaves, you know, future generations to have the same level of experience we're having, right? The answer is no. By the way, we're not. We're burning through it far too rapidly and hurting, you know, the future by doing that. So we have to be, cities are trying to figure out how do we create the policies and the behaviors and the innovation to be able to be more resource friendly, if you like. So those are, you know, four major categories that are pretty consistent with cities around the world.
Awesome. So, you know, you've talked about a lot of things that didn't necessarily end up being the traditional way we think about technology. What's the interplay between technology and smart cities or smart communities movement? Yeah,
well, the great thing about living now in the 21st century, although I think every generation thinks they live in amazing times, I think we live in amazing times, more so than others, is we have a lot of new capabilities. I mean, the mindset in Silicon Valley often is, it's, you know, not so much whether we can build it or can we build it, but we're shifting to more of should we build it, you know, because the technology to do stuff is just becoming more accessible. You know, we see we're in the early stages of some very groundbreaking technologies that carry with them amazing benefits, but also some risks, like artificial intelligence. Or the soon-to-emerge space of quantum computing, which these are not, by the way, both AI and quantum are not incremental innovation. These are revolutionary technologies. These are going to change the world in profound ways. And hopefully we can leverage them in a positive way to be able to solve problems in our communities. More specifically, to your question about, you know, this interaction between cities and technology, this is another commonality that I saw and experienced, by the way, when I first joined public life and I started to work for a city, is every time I would go to the office in the first few weeks, I noticed that everything was constrained. There was not enough time, you know, not enough skills, too many projects, not for money. You know, it was a world of constraints.
We don't have that problem in this region.
No, right. So this resonates with you. But there was one thing which was in abundance, which was data. We had more data than we could possibly ever, we were not dealing with at the time.
Right.
It's one thing that most cities in the world have. I happened to be talking at a particular event a few weeks ago, and I mentioned that every city has too much data. And in a polite way, one of the speakers told me about some developing nations where they don't have data because they don't have computers or they're not connected. So I was schooled. I was like, yeah, you're right. The vast majority of developed cities in the world have, just by their sheer existence, are generating a lot of data. Even a relatively small city like Palo Alto, and my guess is Kenosha and Racine also generate a lot of data.
Absolutely.
It's just something we do by operating a city and in increasing ways. What I did observe was, wow, we have all this abundance of data, and it's usually we create it by doing a function, or there's a byproduct that is spun off because we do a function. We didn't do anything with it. So there's a term we use. It's sort of like, are we taking advantage of derivative value, like a secondary use of that data? For example, being able to collect information about issues that people report. So people report graffiti or abandoned bicycles or maybe trash on, and we collect that as cities. But now we collect it and then we respond. Hopefully, we send out a crew that fixes a pothole or cleans up a street problem. But then the question is, what do we do with that data later on? And most cities don't do anything. The process is finished. It's over. Right. I wanted to challenge that. I was like, this is incredibly rich data that we're not leveraging. What would happen if we started to analyze it? What kind of trends do we start to see? Are problems getting worse? Are they getting better? Where are they happening? Why are they happening? We start to use data to answer questions that, by the way, elected people love, and often cities don't produce for them. Some of that, by the way, is a result of talent. We don't have enough data scientists. We don't have enough data analysts generally.
And sometimes imagination, to simply reimagine how we could do it.
That's right. That's very, yeah, absolutely. Great. That's a really core component of how we need to approach city problems with a greater sense of imagination. I like that a lot. So I think the commonality among the world is, and an easy opportunity is to start to leverage data for better decision making in our communities, for finding sort of the patterns or what we call the signals in the noise, so we can see what's really going on, and giving that data, by the way, to other people, right, for them to be citizen scientists, or giving the data to universities to be able to conduct research and create new insights for a city. So that, to me, that's the data is the ultimate intersection.
Yeah, I think when you talk about artificial intelligence and the data that is sitting, almost if you think about it as dark data, right? We just really don't understand what it's telling us.
That's right.
The ability to use that artificial intelligence at the same time combining it with the data really gives you this powerful opportunity to think about forward positioning of services. So rather than running these services all very discriminately in silos, there could be really incredibly intense areas of a city that are really service rich and other parts that are really have a significant gap. So the ability to be able to use that artificial intelligence to predict where you need the service so that you could actually reduce the cost and increase the responsiveness of government in the process. So there's just so many things that could come out of, as you talk about leapfrogging forward there.
Yeah. I think some of the challenges right now is talent. We have to have really smart people working on these issues inside government and outside of government. We have to have universities, graduating more people in these areas. And because there is really a massive gap in the private sector and the public sector. Once we have the talent, we can ask more complicated questions and we can start to solve some of the more complicated problems.
We have the Wisconsin idea here, and so it's always about how we can apply the education and the scholarship to real problems in the state of Wisconsin. So you're raising one that hopefully we can begin to work on. That's wonderful. Talk to us a little bit. You've mentioned connectivity, and you've mentioned the lack of it in places. Talk to us a little bit about how this plays out in its impact on equity and what we might do about it.
Yeah. Well, in some ways, it's very clear, how just by not having access to a computer, regular access to internet, for example, it doesn't allow some people to know what jobs are available or to be able to apply online. People go to libraries and stuff. There's an inconvenience factor there. We found, for example, that when children were required to be at home and go on the internet, when kids didn't have internet access, there was some terrible stories of children sitting outside of McDonald's or other places where there was Wi-Fi so they could just go to school. If you think of this on a global basis, it's wild. We've about 7.6 billion people on the planet, right? We've only connected, or I say only, it depends how you look at it. We've connected about 4 billion people now to the internet. Well, if you are an optimist like me, you say, wow, that's incredible. We've connected 4 billion people. If you're the pessimist, you say, well, what about the other 3 billion people?
Right.
So you have to kind of look at it like that. So, almost half, it's about 60% of the world is connected, 40% is not connected yet. So tomorrow morning, 40% of the world will wake up and have none of the advantages that the internet has brought to us in terms of access to knowledge, assisting with democracy, access to education, even now medicine and things like that. So, at the global level, this is chronic. Good news story there is we're connecting people very fast, thousands and thousands of people every day, maybe now in the millions actually by every week. So we will connect more and more people. Getting back to the US, making it a little local for a moment, is when you talk about what's required to make a smarter, more sustainable community, there's some prerequisites, right? Like if you don't have this in place, the other stuff won't happen. And one of the things you need to have in place, you have to build out what's called a digital infrastructure.
Right.
Right, and at one very basic level, digital infrastructure is the availability of internet, but there's more parts to it as well in there. So the data is clear on this. There's a direct correlation between communities that have expansive broadband and economic success, right? Chattanooga, for example, in Tennessee, they were one of the first American cities to go big on gigabit internet, and their economy prospered. Because people moved there, talented people also moved there because they wanted to have this fast internet in their community. So it is time for the United States to bridge that gap, right? There can't be people who have fast internet and a big part of the American population who have very bad or no access.
Right.
That's a problem that we have to solve quickly, and it's, the issues are meaningful and directly impact people's lives, and it's an equality issue. Yeah.
I think often about some of the other work that I do around human services, where you see folks, as government has determined under COVID that they aren't opening the offices and they're making the service available. But we also have to think about the ability for consumers, for residents to be able to actually access meaningfully. So to the degree that you're putting up the application online, if there's not also some source to help them navigate through it, have we really created a situation where people don't actually get the service, even though it's right in front of them? In those cases. So I think about the not just the availability of digital infrastructure, but the meaningful use of it in education and how to best leverage it in that process. I think that digital infrastructure is as important to economic vitality for the future as roads, rails, and ports were 100 years ago. So we just have to keep considering what equity really means for us in light of that. I'm sorry.
If I could just add just one point, because I feel I would be remiss if I didn't sort of complete this whole thing, which is, you started to go there a little bit, is there is sort of this new digital divide. The digital divide isn't necessarily those that have access to the internet or those that don't. It's those that know how to use it and those that don't know how to use it. And as we connect everybody, which we eventually will, we also need to make sure that inclusion and equality is about equal access to the opportunity. So, you talked about the infrastructure being as important as highways and railways. In school, we got, reading, writing, mathematics, and programming perhaps is in there at some level, but certainly the comfort digital experiences, not just at the child level, because I think we're going to be okay with the children,
Right.
but other populations that aren't being served.
I totally agree. And thinking about it in terms of also a reasonable accommodation, how does the technology aid and not divide us from people with disabilities or differently abled, being able to use that technology? You're working with a lot of cities, mayors, communities. Could you talk to us about how would you recommend communities get started? How could they begin their own initiative?
Well, it's interesting. Here at the university, they've got the Center for research and innovation in smart cities, and you think that this is a movement and a phenomenon that is already rolled out, is well underway. The reality is, if I asked even a smart city colleague, can you name some smart cities in the world or cities that are doing really incredible things, they're going to list some the likes of Copenhagen and maybe Dublin and New York, Madrid and Aurora, Illinois.
All the places I want to go, like Aurora. Yes, absolutely.
But I tell you, they will run out of names after not so many listing. We know the big ones, but the world has thousands of cities, and most are not on the journey yet. And so I'm up here. I'm just thrilled to be part of this because we're at the start of it. And by the way, Parkside has an opportunity to be really part of the voice and the innovation and the research that helps really propel this movement, particularly when it comes to the smaller communities. Not necessarily the mega cities; those are 10 million people or more. But communities that are 100,000 people and less, which, as you've
Racine.
Yes, and which is the vast majority, by the way, of American cities. We're a country of small cities, and so with that in mind, we're at the start of this, and so there's all the opportunity I think is ahead. There's some good models. Remind me again the core of your question, if you could.
Just how to get started.
It's
such a huge thing, right? So as you think about, as cities are trying to struggle with, and we talk about the fact that 98% of these communities are 100,000 in population or fewer, limited resources, the ability to get talent. Given all those kinds of strictures, where do you start if all those sort of conditions are wrapped around you?
Yeah, okay, thank you so much. And you were so kind not to embarrass me by saying,
no.
I told you. So I was painting this bigger picture to come to your question, to the answer of your question.
And I was loving it. Yeah. I mean, we were going to Aurora, we were going to all sorts of places.
We were traveling the world. That's right. And so the vast majority haven't started. So that gets me to the question: how do they start? There you go. They made the connection. Different answers for different communities, right? You can't have a universal answer to that. It's not fair. Every community has different advantages and disadvantages. This might sound like the sort of not the sort of the most substantive answer in the world, but in fact, I write about this in my book a lot, and it's what I've observed. One of the first starting points is that there is a leader that believes in this, right? That it starts with some sort of leader who's a visionary. It's hard to impose this on a community, or to say to try to beg a mayor to do it, or a city manager. They need to believe in it and become the champion and be the visionary. That's a very strong starting point, right? If you have a compelling vision and you are, a good leader, people will follow you. That's the definition of leadership in many ways. So I would say, first of all, if you're looking at a community that hasn't started, and there's no leadership yet, well, that's got to be fixed, right? If there's no will or leadership, I think you're at a disadvantage. So that's the first thing. I think the second component would be to understand your capabilities ready. What are the strengths you have as a community?
Right.
And well, of course, I should have said this, but I kind of assumed. It's not good to assume it. You have to identify what is he trying to do, right? I mean, if you're Racine, let's say, and there is vision that we want to be a smarter and more sustainable community. Let's define that. What does that actually mean? And when we start to do it, what does it look like? Like, how do we measure it? Is there a set of metrics that we can say that we're progressing towards it or away from it? Or is it measurable? Right. We used to. We've spent the 20th century measuring success with GDP. We now think in the 21st century that's not a great measure of human success, right? That a better metric might be how happy are you, right? Because you can be rich and unhappy, right?
I prefer to be in that option than not rich and unhappy.
That's right. That's right. No, but so you got the vision. Now figure out what those issues are. Now look at our strengths, because you want to know what your capabilities are to address the issues.
Yeah.
And then by that, there's gaps that appear. Here's where we have the gaps where we don't have it. And that begins to be the basis for a strategy, right? The last point I would just say comes back to something we were chatting about just briefly before, is for low-hanging fruit, for easy access to making a difference, I tell a lot of city leaders to do something with data, because you've got it. Yeah, and you don't. There's not a massive, there's not a huge investment for this. There's a lot you can do with the existing data you have, to engage a lot of stakeholders, make better decision making, even build an ecosystem of partners who can build solutions using that data. That's in my experience a place where you can move fast, because the other stuff actually does take time and it's more complicated, and then you get into questions of funding and how do you make sure that you can pay for the things that you want to actually do.
Yeah. And for us, we actually made sure that one of the first things we did was to pass a resolution by the council clarifying what we mean by and what does the community, therefore, through its leadership, mean for smart cities. One of the other things that we did was to have an asset mapping. So we really started to think of, what do we have to offer in this new world?
Yes.
What assets do we have that would really be attractive to then these public-private partnerships, which I think for cities that are under 100,000 really have to rely on public-private partnerships, because they'll never come up with enough revenue, even for the existing problems already. So to make the major investments, it really takes both sides of the equation coming together to try to advance forward. In light of that, then, how do you see engaging communities? So having thought about how you can get started, how do you bring the rest of the community with you?
Yeah. Well, you have to, first of all. This is an essential component. By the way, it's a very big difference from, I moved from the private sector into the public sector, and that's a really big difference, right? I'll tell a story that our city manager would often tell me or remind me of, is, in the private sector, when a CEO makes a decision, the decision is made and everybody goes and does the work. It's like, that's what we're going to do. In public service, when the city manager makes a decision, that's the start of the conversation. That's when you start debating it, right? So that's very different to me. That's very different from what I came from to, moving into, a city life. And it's deliberative, and there's a lot of different points of view. Just another little kind of observation that I have had working in public services, you're never going to make everybody happy.
Right.
So just deal with that, right? Let's get that already established. You could offer ice cream to the kids on Sunday morning every week, and there would be a whole group of people who would be against it. You can't. There's no. What you want to do is get as many people as you can, and make sure that those people that are reluctant see some benefit eventually, or they might hesitantly see the benefit after a while. People have to be in the conversation pretty early, right? There's a very successful process that some communities have been playing with.
There we go.
I talk to the robots,
It's AI, they just know.
So, what was I saying? Did I get this right?
It was brilliant, though.
Yeah,
it was brilliant. We were just talking about communications and really bringing people in early in the conversation.
Yeah. So, when I look back at the video, I'm going to be like so annoyed at myself.
No, this is good. This is good.
So, yeah, bringing people into the conversation very early, giving people a voice, to shape the answer. Okay, I've thought of it. So there is a process that's used in communities that's having a lot of success, and it's a thing called participatory budgeting. Participatory budgeting.
Okay.
And budgeting is kind of rather confusing, and often people think secretive process in government. And somehow money is divided among projects, and then that's how everything happens. And we try to make it transparent, and it's often people don't have the visibility at the right time. Participatory budgeting says at the beginning of that season, we're going to bring everybody in, the community into usually a physical place. I think there are now, because of COVID, lots of people doing it online, and they get to have a voice in how money is divided among projects. There's all sorts of discussion processes and sort of like there's an ability to test and simulate what would happen when money is spent in a certain way. So, for example, if you spend all your money or 30 of your money on this and the rest on this, the other thing you wanted to do doesn't get addressed, and that has this consequence. So that has been a very successful way of demonstrating good participation, and it works, of course, in terms of the smart city work, because that requires budgeting and investment as well. I think the last point I would just say about this, and maybe bringing it up to contemporary challenges, is, and again, this is with respect to, great respect to all my city colleagues and stuff. Cities are very bad at communicating, right? They often don't have, they don't have marketing departments in the same way private companies do.
Right.
They have often a public information officer who sort of states facts when the media
And one.
calls it. Yeah, and one person. And this isn't a world that's moved on greatly in terms of how you inform communities and engage them in getting feedback and being able to have a more interactive dialogue with them. So that's an area, by the way, for improvement and for skills, is to have for cities to be better communicators. Typically what happens is somebody else is reporting it and it's a bad story, as opposed to we've done these amazing things, you should know about it, right? I remember, this kind of makes me sound bad, but I'll share it, is very early on in my tenure, I was, from time to time I would have to present to the city council. And you know how it works. It's usually...
It's a lovely experience.
It's a tough one, yeah. You're grilled a little bit, and then it's also on public television and stuff. It's all live. And fortunately, we were doing some good work, so I got, most of the time, my team and I got good compliments. But this would happen early on in my tenure. Maybe it was the mayor at the time, said, "Jonathan, you're doing good stuff, but I just learned about a couple of things you were doing from another mayor in another city. I didn't learn it from us, We can't even communicate internally. Like, people in the city didn't even know what we were doing, and the elected officials who should know what we're doing didn't know. So there was something to be learned about that. So as we embark on really complicated things, whether it's transitioning to solar or working on preparing for self-driving vehicles, or putting up sensors that people might think are, that are going to be for spying on you, but they're actually for being able to detect air quality issues, or even help with transportation. We got to tell the good news story about that and get to people where they are. So cities need to use social media. They really need to become good at it. A Facebook account that you spin up and people have questions and responses that the city doesn't respond to makes a bad situation much worse. Right. So.
Right, that's right. I think a lot of this is about making it relevant for folks and giving them the why. And so that they really see some value to how it affects them in their lives. Sure. Speaking of this, just if you could talk a little bit about innovation districts, and as this has become a topic in Kenosha, how do you see them? What are the sort of best practices? What are you learning in your work?
The good news story on this is that there are a lot of different models for innovation in the public sector. There's innovation labs, for example. Cities never used to have innovation labs. Cities didn't even have IT leaders. I mean, this is all pretty new. You know, I remember my title was CIO, Chief Information Officer of the City of Palo Alto, the head of technology, basically. And you know, I'd meet people, be introduced to people, and I would go into some big, you know, lecture about something, and they'd stop me about 15 minutes in, and they'd say, "Wait, there's a CIO in a city?" You know, I said I should have started with that. You know, you know, there's definitely a misunderstanding about that role. Remind me the question one more time again.
No, just in terms of looking at innovation districts.
Districts, innovation. Yes.
You know, there's so many, as you talked about models, and just
Yes.
thinking about, you know, we talked about city, we talked about community, and then sort of narrowing that focus down on innovation districts. And how do you see that playing out in some of the models you're
Yes.
experiencing?
Yeah. So this is what you get when you are busy the entire day and, you know, kept active. I'm not absent-minded. It's been a long day, a long tiring day.
Well, that's all right. Well, we're going to stick with you.
Thank you. There's lots of different models for innovation, and that's a positive, right? Innovation labs. So cities didn't have CIOs, they didn't have innovation labs. These are all things that have started to happen just in the last decade, where cities can experiment with tech. They're prepared to invest a little bit, you know, spend a bit of money on things that might fail. And there's these things called living labs that are parts of cities where you can even demonstrate stuff. You can show you know, what a ground-based terrestrial drone looks like and how it works, and people can get to see it and, you know, interact if it makes sense. And then there's this idea of innovation districts. You know, often it's an area of a city. Aurora is an entire city with an innovation district, but often it's a part of the city that more often than not has been neglected for some time. It might have been a big factory or a factory area, and the factory's now gone. And how do you revitalize that area? Yeah. So innovation districts are designated areas for things like tax incentives to move startups in there, or even to bring, you know, to build some very innovative housing, to bring some young people in perhaps. Right. And often universities have an annex in an innovation district. It can generate economic outcomes, which is a lot of the motivation. So they're showing up in lots of places in the world. I was in the Netherlands, in a place called Eindhoven, and a couple of years ago. And this is, I believe, where Philips was born, the big global electronics company. And well, sadly, they did eventually move all their manufacturing, most of it, to Southeast Asia. And so a great big area of Eindhoven, a major European city, was just left discarded. And they had all these warehouses and old factories and stuff, and it was, you know, a very significant part of the city. Eventually, it came around to, you know, what do we do? You know, we have a couple of issues. First of all, we have all this area that needs to be redeveloped, but we also have economic challenges. And so they decided to make it an innovation district. And you know, it just so happens that converting warehouses and factories, you can make some pretty hip homes and stuff. You can have some cool restaurants and clubs and bars. So they did that, and brought in some housing, you know, converted to, you know, and then tech firms went in there, and it's a great success story. I mean, I was taken there, and I saw the images and what was there before and then what was there now. And it's stunning. It's absolutely beautiful. It's packed with people, and where just a few years earlier there was nobody. So it really is ultimately an economic driven activity that is showing real success.
I think Kenosha will be very happy to hear that, since they are working on this in a former manufacturing site. It's now being converted over, so I think they'll be very happy. We talked a little bit about autonomous vehicles earlier, and as we saw, Racine just launched its autonomous vehicle program just last week. As you think about this, you know, it has so many impacts on, from insurance rates to public safety. Who do you ticket when a car doesn't have a driver? To, you know, just a series of things. How do you see that happening, and how it's changing our norms as we
Yeah.
reimagine something that's very common to us right now.
Yeah. So I'll just share what I shared with a small group prior to this session. If you and I were sitting here 3, maybe 4 years ago, and you'd asked me a similar question, I would have been on the fence a little bit. I would have said, you know what, I see really cool things with autonomous vehicles, and I think they're going to be on our highways, easy areas. But I struggle to imagine and see autonomous vehicles being completely autonomous on every conceivable road anywhere in the country or anywhere in the world. My mind has changed on that. Now, when you ask me the question, I'm completely in the mindset of we're headed towards a world of autonomous vehicles more quickly than most people realize. We already see, for example, Google's spin-off called Waymo offering a ride share in Phoenix, one of the biggest American cities in Arizona. And it's not some sort of service you call it up and they can only take you to certain places. In Phoenix, you can go everywhere in the city with this Waymo rideshare service, and there's no driver. This is a fully, level 5 autonomous vehicle. So it's here, and the question then is, what does the transition look like, and then what's the impact of the transition? It's very hard to put a date or timeline on it. Okay, that's the first thing I would just say to you. That people love that. They want to know from me, when will we be fully autonomous?
Right.
And all I will say is this, and this is a relatively well-educated answer based on the research and the work being done by the existing automobile companies. Is it's longer than 10 years, but it's less than 30 years. Right? So it seems like it's somewhere in that period. And of course, the future is not a straight line, so we'll see what happens. It could happen faster, right? And so what's going to happen is there's going to be a period of time when humans are driving cars and computers are driving cars. That is the worst time ever, right? And we're not exactly sure how we're going to do that. I mean, one of the proposals is that you are going to have to kind of slice up our communities into areas where people can drive and where computers can drive. The reality is humans are very bad at driving. I don't know if you know this. We kill each other at a rate of about 1.5 million people every year around the world, and tens of millions of people are injured. So, I think it'll be a generation or two ahead when, they learn, kid learns humans used to drive cars, after drinking or being tired or taking medicine or looking at their phone or screaming at their kids. This is, we all do this traveling at 70 miles an hour.
Right.
So already today we shouldn't be doing that. Autonomous vehicles, if you ever get a chance, and I would recommend
Come to Racine.
Come to Racine and maybe experience it. It's very weird to start, by the way, and particularly at speed. A computer drives a car different to a human being. Let's put it that way. For example, when a self-driving vehicle goes off the highway up onto the ramp, it goes faster than I would do it. Because it knows what the car is capable of. It's running these scientific experiments every second, and it's calculating that's completely safe. The car is not going to flip over or skid or anything like that. But it goes a little faster. As a human being, you're overcompensating and you're more comfortable. So you there's a moment in the first couple of days of being in a self-driving vehicle when it's exiting at speed off the ramp, and you're like, oh my goodness, am I going to live? Am I going to get through this? So it's going to come. We're going to transition. I think at some point in the future, humans won't be able to drive. It'll be just too dangerous. Right? You can drive on the weekends or in the evenings as a hobby, in some safe place. But for the most part, on the streets, it'll just be autonomous vehicles. Now, the neat thing about this topic is you could sort of end it there, and you could say, well, cars will drive themselves. Humans won't have to drive cars, and that's cool, right? But to me, that's the beginning of the story. That's not the end of it. The beginning of the story is this, because when computers drive cars, all of the things we built to support humans driving cars won't be necessary. So, for example, do self-driving cars need traffic signals? No. Do they need stop signs? No. Do they need lanes? No. Do they need the grid system? No. So we sort of built America in particular around sort of this architecture that's in support of the car, humans driving cars. So you have to imagine a world in which cars drive themselves. You can design cities completely differently. And we will. We'll start to think differently. Today, in many communities, 60% of land use is for cars, not for people. And can we then restore that to people? Because cars, computer-driven cars, have a completely different set of needs. So, two, maybe three quick additional points, because it's such an important big topic and something right in front of us. Is, well, cars will be electric, right? That's the next thing. We're going to live through the end of the combustion engine. Never thought that would be possible, but that's going to happen pretty fast. We already have dates around some of this. Yeah. You know, the UK is targeting somewhere by 2035. Last gasoline car will be sold. In India, I think it's 2045, and so on. And so we're going to see sort of the end of that. We're going to see the end of car ownership. This is even more profound, right? If it's cheaper, much cheaper to get a ride share, why would you ever own a car? If it's more enjoyable, safer, and cheaper, you're not going to own a car. And anyway, cars finally will not be sold, right? So what you're left with is this sort of autonomous electric, shared economy for vehicles, changing the shape of our communities. Now, if you're a city today, you kind of need to start to think about this. This is not something that's going to begin in 20 years. It's beginning now. Racine is already starting to do some really good work on this. So I would advise all cities to begin the work of analysis and studying and research, and then the work of beginning to think about policies and how the city is going to respond to the changes ahead.
I'm excited because it's a real opportunity for democratization of transportation.
Yes.
People with disabilities who may not be able to drive, people who are older who may not feel confident in driving. This opens the door for so many people to be able to get the independence back that they may not have had in some time. I know that we're going to wrap up. Is there an opportunity to ask some questions for the community? So yes, indeed, we'll democratize the conversation we've been having and open it to the floor here. So please.
So just on the last topic, the shared vehicles, that's a fascinating topic. Do you see that as a huge revenue opportunity for cities as they basically get rid of vehicles and they're
So actually, for the folks watching online, I'll repeat the question. Is the movement towards autonomous vehicles in any way a revenue opportunity, I think, for cities, is the heart of it. I mean, there are some kind of real negatives that you brought up. For example, the insurance companies are going to suffer greatly, right? And the revenue that comes from that, taxes that would perhaps feed their way into government, are going to drop. So we can certainly see some of the negative consequences.
We'll just tax whoever owns the vehicles now.
Right, and there's some,
Well, the opportunity would be for the city to own a vehicle and not allow any private transportation within the city limits.
I doubt you'd be able to get away with it, but in fact, if it's a matter of doing the land planning, I could easily see where you'd end up having the public-private partnership of where do you put all of those vehicles, right? And how do you do it in a way where people who are living in the community still have a quality of life? Who wants to be the one looking over the huge inventory of those vehicles coming and going all the time, right? So I think those are the kinds of places where you could have the public and private playing together to figure out, because I don't know that we're really thought through. These vehicles may not, your home may no longer have a garage, so it may change the way, the car may not have a front seat anymore, right? Because there's nobody sitting in it. But then there's still this issue of where do you put all these vehicles? Are they going in a ramp? I mean, where do you put them so that they're safe? How are they coming and going? Who's responsible for it? So it's going to be a whole series of things, as you said, about policies that are going to come up.
Yeah. I don't have a lot more to add. I mean, you can start to become very creative. Eventually, we'll have completely new opportunities that are based on the form factor of vehicles and what they're able to offer and what you do in vehicles. Because you don't need two sets of forward-facing seats in a level 5 self-driving vehicle. So I mean, part of the answer will be it'll be surprising, and that's always the case with innovation. The actual outcome will be surprising in the ways that we use them, and what opportunities that will present for cities.
Well, I wanted to have a recliner in mind.
Sure.
When I get it, I very much want to have a recliner.
Another question?
How do you see mass transportation fitting in this with the automated vehicle and, should we have automated mass transportation? I think we would need a combination. Do you know something about that, or how would we innovate on that?
Yeah.
Repeat the question for the home viewers.
Yes. In a world, a changing world of transportation and an autonomous future, what about the role of public transportation? Things like trains, high-speed rail, that type of thing. Well, I think we need to continue to proceed forward with, modernizing the American railway systems. There's no doubt about it, and hopefully we'll get some money to do that. The absence of, Shinkansen, Japanese, bullet trains in the United States is a disappointment. We could have those too. We chose to invest in cars and highways rather than, bullet trains around the United States. And we're paying the price for it now. So I do think we'll still continue to see that. I think there's been a renaissance in light rail in a lot of communities around the world. Even in the US, a lot of communities are again bringing back some electric-based light rail. So there's a role for that. There's an interesting thing about self-driving cars, though. There's this sort of idea of, in a way, we can think differently about public transport then, because they would be a form of public transport. So if you needed to move a group of people, you could sort of tether these little pods together full of people. That would be the equivalent of a train, but it would go at high speed on the highway because you no longer worry about collisions or the accidents that can happen with human-driven vehicles. Just to be a little bit futuristic for a second, I'm very interested in something called Hyperloop, which some of you know about. This is sort of almost like pneumatic tubes which shoot a train through a tube above or below ground. There are some construction projects underway.
Elon Musk, as usual.
Yes, he's involved in it, and Virgin, Richard Branson's company. If it happens, if we can actually have some form of Hyperloop, it's pretty game changing because it really, in the absence of a lot of people living from home or working from home, and we don't know what that'll look like in a few years from now, you could still have people commute far distances on a Hyperloop because of the speed. So you could have a redistribution of where people live in a positive way, possibly. So I like to look ahead too at those possibilities. I think the best public transportation for a lot of people that America doesn't use are bicycles. I think we need to embrace bicycles the way a lot of the world is, it sounds really weird, but they're transformational. They really are. The great story that I learned visiting France a few years ago, visiting Paris, is this must have been about 7-8 years ago. A little delegation, we went over to Paris and we met with the deputy mayor, and they said they were starting to experiment with bicycles. And when I don't know how well if you know Paris and pre sort of 2000, the idea of Parisian cycling was abhorrent. It wasn't something Parisians did, right? They did not cycle bikes around Paris. You wouldn't have seen a cyclist really. So somebody then says, well, hey, other European cities are doing this. It can be very advantageous for health and for the environment and for congestion. And so they decided to do the ride share, the bicycle borrowing thing that when the bicycles are in the racks. And they decided, well, we'll go slow in it because we don't know how the Parisians will respond. And they ordered like 200. And immediately all 200 were always out. So they said, well, we'll order another 1,000. And immediately all 1,000 were out. Now fast forward to today. Go to Paris today, all bicycles. They've transformed. The city is absolutely transformed. And during COVID, they've been installing hundreds of miles of bike lanes around Paris. So the city's changing. In fact, they're making the center of the city of Paris into an urban garden, in alignment with this. So there are things we can do. Maybe the last point I should say about this. We're going to be kicked out of here, I think.
Yeah, I got to live here, man. So
I get on a plane and leave. That's right. there's this lovely concept of that's taking hold, which is called the 15-minute city. Again, it's it has been a European notion, but is starting to find traction around the world. And it's this idea that, part of the problem with cities and the byproduct of congestion and the reason why we see congestion, and we see, even employment challenges, is people have to go distances to get basic services, to go to their dentist or doctor or supermarket or their job, whatever. If you bring people to where those things are, or those things to where people are, and shorten the distances, and you do this all around the community, you can change the dynamic of the community. So the idea is that everything you need as a human is 15 minutes or less by walking or bicycle.
So we have time for a couple more questions.
So we talked a little bit about the what to do. What about the how to do it? Is there a best practice suggestion and construct, be it city governmental organization or public-private partnership, or any thoughts?
Sure. Well, I wrote a book on it, and it's for sale right at the back.
A good lead-in, a good lead-in.
It sounds like it was a plant. It was not a plant. But honestly, no, I wanted to capture all these insights and things I'd seen around the world in one textbook, and it's there. So I do talk about it. I think the right answer, though, is it depends on each city. It really does. It depends on the culture, the strengths of that community, its finances, its geography, its demographic. There are lots of things that come into play when deciding how to approach it, like how to do it. And so it's hard to kind of give one simple answer that would universally answer it for everybody. If I was asked, if I'm invited to advise the city of Brussels in Belgium on how they should approach their smart city work, I'm going to do my diligence and figure out, the strengths, the things we talked about earlier, way before I ever make a recommendation about how they should go about it.
So I think we have one more question. And after this, folks, we will have some time to sort of talk and maybe have a drink and talk to Jonathan. One more question.
I'm a statistician, and I've been dealing with data for about 50 years now, under a wide variety of conditions and circumstances. And one notion that really puzzles me or troubles me, or I've never found a solution to, is the notion of rapid technology versus slow implementation. People have no idea how long it takes to figure something out, particularly if it's new and different. On the other hand, information, very modest amounts of information, can be extraordinarily valuable. One of my favorite examples is President Johnson, Lyndon Johnson, who made the decision by himself based on information from the draft. He found from the draft that black people who were being given physical exams in the early 1960s had serious health problems. They were being rejected for the military at a much, much higher rate than white men. And this piece of information about the difference in rates led to Medicaid. He single-handedly took on this issue based on a very tiny bit of information and decided that we had to have a healthcare system for poor people, and he implemented it, and it's expanded, and it covers vastly more people than it ever used to. And it was a favorite program of his. So that's an example where the information you need is tiny, but it's very, very difficult to figure out what it is that you need out of the vast plethora. I mean, you can now analyze the data from the 40 million Medicare patients all in one place, and people talk about how that only applies to people 65 plus and a small number of other people. There's a serious misunderstandings on the part of people who think that data is easily moved, and a lot of data is, don't misunderstand that.
Sure.
For example, the self-driving car on the freeway is using data automatically. No one ever has to touch it. There are no hands-on unless, of course, there's a serious problem. And people have to design that system, and they have to monitor it on an ongoing basis to make sure that it's safe. But vast amounts of the data you're talking about is never touched by human hands. But there's a vast amount of data, and as a group, we don't really know what to do to get useful information out of that, or if someone who happens to be the president is willing to say, I'm going to fix that, or a mayor, or anyone else who's in charge of things. You're working along, doing your data analysis, and you just don't know what's going to turn out to be meaningful in the political environment.
Sure. I'm not going to repeat the question. I'm not sure that there was a question. I mean, it was excellent.
It's a challenge
Oh, yeah.
to your vision. Your vision is inadequate. It is grossly inadequate to the human condition.
Okay.
The comment that you made about the ability to understand the data that is ubiquitous around us, right? I think there's this saying that it takes a very smart fish to recognize the water, right? The things that are completely surrounding us, the ability to pick that out and have it be meaningful for you. And I think we all have to be much more astute at what we actually see on a daily basis. If when you're traveling internationally, you recognize more about your own country,
Right.
because you see the difference. It almost requires us to have more of that conversation as you talked about, engaging more people in the conversation, because it's easier to see the difference or have more people looking at the matter and potentially picking it up when you've got many more eyes on it. I just think that that's part of the process that makes it rich. So.
Okay.
Thank you for your questions, and as I said, we have a little time afterwards. I think I probably owe both Jonathan and William a drink, and so I think they'll be here. But let's give them a round of applause.
All right.
Good stuff.
Thank you, sir.
Nice.
All right. We made it through. We made it through.
Of course. That's excellent.
Okay.
I don't know if we're still on video, so.
What is that?
No, I don't know if we're still on video, so
Oh,
we'll
yeah.
pause. But no, it was very nicely done, very smooth, and I really enjoyed talking with you.
Very
Thank
fun.
you so much.
Very fun.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I heard about that drink, so I'm getting it.
I know.
Yeah, there we go. Let me just get myself.
Covered a lot of ground.
Just fun.
Yes, for sure.
I just wanted to introduce myself briefly. I'm Alex Todd. I'm the director of the
About 50 people watching.
Lovely, lovely.
Yeah.
And
I
probably
worked for
from a
Tommy
lot of
Thompson
different
and
places.
saw him 2 weeks
a
ago,
lot of
so
different
love the
places
man
in the world.
dearly.
Somebody from Budapest. They just said.
Thank you.
All right. I have not touched anything, therefore I've not broken anything.
Perfect. That's what I like to hear.
Let's see. I can unclip one. Okay.